If you do something instead of nothing, you're still going to have a lower penalty than if you did nothing. Okay. So basically, it's all winning. It's all winning. Any stab at it, no matter how imperfect, is still going to be dramatically better than doing nothing. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for self-employed people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're a creative or soul-centered entrepreneur or wellness practitioner who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello, beautiful. I hope you are doing well in this winter season. Today, I want to talk to you about discomfort. Something that I sometimes say when I'm giving a class is that the first time you do something like pay your first estimated quarterly tax payment, or the first time you transfer some money into your first investments, buy your first index fund, it can feel super uncomfortable, right? And I just want to speak to that a little bit because that discomfort is actually incredibly normal. And yet I think sometimes your brain can interpret it as bad and make you pull back to a place of comfort, right? So the reason that this comes up is that I'm reading this book by Adam Grant. It's called Hidden Potential, The Science of Achieving Greater Things. If you don't know Adam Grant, he's a fabulous author, super popular, and a great writer. And he's got, all this like sort of data and stuff about the way that people learn. And I think it's a really good book. I'll link it in the show notes because you may really enjoy it. But one of the things I was just reading this weekend is he was talking about discomfort, and that basically discomfort is like an engine of growth, and that people who learn things that are seemingly impossible, and he used an example of like super language users, people who speak like 8 languages and who teach themselves later in life when in theory it should be harder to do. He found that what these people had in common was they had all taught themselves to seek out the feeling of discomfort. And if you've ever studied a language, you know that there's a real feeling of like, oh God, I don't want to make a fool of myself. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to embarrass myself. It's really hard to speak when you don't have a good baseline of vocabulary and grammar. But what he was saying is that actually learning how to speak really well and really quickly is actually better associated with jumping in way before you have grammar, way before you have vocabulary, and actually just committing to the feeling of discomfort. That the more discomfort you feel, the quicker you grow, because basically the only way to hit a target is to make a ton more mistakes. If you make a whole bunch of attempts, a couple of them will land. So the way to hit a target is to make so many mistakes that you got a higher rate of landing, right? Of hitting the target. That's essentially the point that he's making in this book. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly how it is when you pay estimated quarterly taxes, especially for the first time, or make your first investment, like move money into an investment account. It just feels scary, right? So I wanted to just take a moment today and talk about those 2 scenarios in particular. Okay. I think a lot of people tell themselves a story that if you make a mistake with your money, that it means something bigger than I just made a mistake, right? We can, and especially if you are, we live in a sort of racist and patriarchal society. I mean, that's just true. And so if you have been taught, like, as a woman, I definitely have had meta messages in my life that money is sort of not my domain and I shouldn't be near it. It's really easy to absorb that and feel like, oh, maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't do this, right? And making a mistake can kind of compound that feeling in your own brain. So I just want to kind of bring that to the surface, that sort of stereotype or meta message that you may have received in your life to say, no, actually, that mistake is normal and it's a part of the process. And there's really no one out there of any gender, any skin color, any ethnicity. There's no one out there who hasn't made mistakes with their money. It's really just part of the learning process, and it makes you normal. Okay. So what I want to encourage you is basically just to seek out discomfort a little more and to recognize that discomfort is actually really a signal of you growing. And I can certainly say that that is true from personal experience. So let me talk about the two scenarios that I see my clients have the most discomfort with, and personally, I felt the most discomfort with when I did them for the first time. So the first one is estimated quarterly taxes. So why are estimated quarterly taxes so freaky and so uncomfortable? Well, if you actually know how they work, it actually makes a lot of sense why they feel so weird. You have to pay estimated quarterly taxes when you work for yourself, when you're self-employed, because payroll is not automatically paying your taxes all year the way it is when you're an employee, right? So we have to do it in this manual way. Just like the employee, we are required to be paying taxes as we go throughout the year. That's the law. But because it's manual, for one thing, everybody knows that things that are automated happen and things that are manual often don't happen, right? So you have to learn how it works and then you have to actively do it, right? So already it's harder to pay quarterly taxes than to have automated payroll withholding. We already know that, right? But the other thing is that your money is taxed in a somewhat complicated way. Not all your income is taxed the same way. And you pay self-employment tax on 100% of your freelance profit, but your income tax rate is actually pretty difficult to calculate because we have a graduated income tax rate system. So, your first chunk of income is taxed at 0, then the next chunk at 10%, the next chunk at 12%, up and up and up until your top dollar. And that highest tax rate that you ever see listed on your tax return is not actually the rate you pay on everything. It's called your marginal rate. It is the rate you pay on your very top dollar only. Okay. So figuring out what your average income tax rate is in order to make a calculation of what income tax you owe plus what self-employment tax you owe on your profit in your self-employed business, it's hard. It's hard to do. Calculating your self-employment tax is much easier because it's steady and it's across the whole thing. So that calculus is actually pretty simple, but figuring out what your income tax on it is hard. And part of the difficulty, not just because of the graduated income tax rate system. P.S. I have a whole Sunlight episode about tax rates. Highly recommend you go review that if you want to understand better how your tax rates are determined. But your income tax rate is not actually fully determined until next year's taxes, right? The act of filing the paperwork of a tax return helps determine what your tax rate is on that money, right? Because that's where you actually calculate how much money you made, right? And tax rates are based on how much money you made. They're not based in theory. So you actually don't have a clear number to use for the calculation when you're calculating what estimated quarterly tax payment you should make. And in that ambiguity, I think rests the discomfort, right? People just feel like I should know, right? And most of us, because there's no tax education in this country, most of us feel like it's us, like it's me. I'm the one who's stupid. I must be stupid. I must not get something, right? Why is this so hard to figure out? I just want to be here as a voice on the other side of that to say, this is why it's so hard. And it's not just you. This is actually normal. And I really want to call attention to the fact that they are called estimated quarterly taxes, not exact quarterly taxes. That is so important. That first word in the title is so important because you cannot know. You cannot get that number absolutely right. All you can do is estimate. So that really is part of it. And this is why perfection and perfectionism is so detrimental. It is such a barrier to getting a hold of your taxes. Because if you want that number to be perfect, you just will never win. You'll never get it. And so you really have to get comfortable with the idea of estimating, even if it's very bad, even if you are pretty wrong, pretty far off, making an estimate, making that payment, then looking back over time and seeing if you can improve it. This is why the mantra that I always use with everyone here on the podcast and in my program is aim for improvement, not perfection, right? If you tune it up every single time you do something, you'll get so much better so quickly, right? That is the actual realistic path to learning and growth. Whereas perfection is an impossible standard. You will never meet it. You will always fail. If perfection is the standard you wish to achieve, you will fail. I can tell you that definitively. But if improvement is your standard, you'll win because you can improve every single time, right? It's a much more humane standard. So just to kind of loop that back to estimated quarterly taxes, it feels really uncomfortable. The very first time you make that payment, it feels super uncomfortable because usually you're coming at it feeling a little uncertain if you calculated the right number, right? You're just not quite sure it's right. And then you go and you make your payment and there's kind of an absence of feedback. It would be nice if it like scored your exam right away and you knew how you did, but that's not how it works. All you get is a little receipt that says this is what you paid, right? It doesn't say, congratulations, you calculated that great, good job, right? It doesn't say that. It just says, here's what you paid. And you're like, I know that. That's what I calculated. And you just have to save that number and hang on to it, report it on your taxes in the upcoming year, and then see how you did, right? So it's a long lag until you actually know how close you came to reality. And so that long feedback loop, I think, is a particularly difficult aspect of estimated quarterly taxes. And while I cannot do anything about, fixing that, what I can say is it's extremely normal, this discomfort that you feel around it. And really, the path to improvement is to do it anyway, is to accept that it just does feel uncomfortable, okay? Don't let that be a signal that says, I shouldn't do this, or like just stops you, right? Just accept discomfort is your path to growth. It's normal, and you don't have to freak out because you feel really uncomfortable about it, okay? All right. So the good news about making your estimated quarterly tax payment is that taking action, even if it is extremely imperfect and pretty wrong, pretty far off base, is still better than freezing and doing nothing. Because the alternative to making a wrong estimated quarterly tax payment, if you think about it, if you make a payment, but it's off, right? Then you're paying something towards your tax bill next April 15th. And maybe it's the wrong number, but it's still a payment towards your tax bill, right? If you freeze and you do nothing, then you've paid zero of your tax bill. If you paid some of your tax bill, but the wrong amount, that's still a lot better, right? It still means next year's tax bill will be that much lower, right? Because you've prepaid that amount. So you're still in a better position if you do make estimated quarterly tax payments, even if they're really low, even if they're so low that you still have some penalties. The penalties will be smaller because the penalties are based on how far short of your actual tax bill your estimates are. If you do something instead of nothing, you're still going to have a lower penalty than if you did nothing. Okay. So basically, it's all winning. It's all winning. Any stab at it, no matter how imperfect, is still going to be dramatically better than doing nothing. Okay. That's the big takeaway I want you to have from this. Okay. Plus, to just normalize the weird feeling that I know you have when you make your first payment, and sometimes your second, third, and fourth. So I want to just make a little quick analogy where when I went back to school for accounting, if you think about how weird that was, I was a fine artist in a world of accountants. Most of them found it more comfortable to just ignore the fact that I was an artist at all rather than acknowledge it because they could not reconcile that I was an artist in their midst. It just didn't make any sense to them. Yeah, it was totally bizarre. I mean, a small aside, I was so personally, I had such imposter syndrome in that program that I had set a pretty high bar for myself that I had determined I was going to get a 4.0 in all my accounting programs. And so not only that, but I was also the best student in the class. So they really could not figure out like, so this lady who who's like a, an older student, right? I'm in classes with like 19 and 20-year-olds. They're like, this lady who's getting the best grade on every exam, who's got a baby, uh, she's an artist, right? That was a real thinker for my classmates in accounting school. Okay. So I'm in this totally bizarre setting, right? Total black sheep. And I did a lot of like business development stuff for accountants. And I found that in accountant settings, the business development training was so geared towards encouraging accountants to take the tiniest, to my eyes, most insignificant amount of risk, right? Like to create a social media account. That's the risk. That's the risky thing, right? Just I to just have a presence at all, right? Or sometimes it would be the risk would be to very slightly tweak your business model so that you are, for example, moving away from hourly pricing and towards value pricing. Now, the rest of the world, like the design world, which I was coming from at the time, when I started school, I was actually working at a design agency. And the design world had been shifting from time-based to value-based pricing for years already. And designers who are far more cutting edge than accountants had already fully grasped this lesson. And it was like, it was obvious that that was a better pricing model for the practitioner. Like, no question, I had already seen this, right? And so I was sort of sitting there thinking, wait a minute, like the scary, scary risk here is that you're moving from one business model that works, like that fundamentally is okay, but has some pain points, to one that works better and where the evidence is pretty damn clear that the profit is higher. That's the risk. I mean, I laughed so hard over this stuff. And it was lonely because I was the only artist in there. I didn't have other people to sympathize with. But I laughed so hard in this because I was like, oh my God, just it made me appreciate the risk taking of artists and like these superpowers that artists have that I actually had never seen or noticed before because I took them so for granted. It was only being in this context of accountants who are so risk averse, so change averse, so resistant to gather new tools or adopt new technologies and new tools that I was like, oh my God, artists are amazing. I mean, artists are like right out there on the bleeding edge, learning AI, learning, whatever it is, whatever the new thing is that they want to speak to in their work, they're going to go get it. And not to mention, if any artist was given the possibility of changing a pricing model to move from something that was fundamentally working to something that provably worked better, every artist in the world would take it because that's who we are. So I just thought, oh my God, wow, artists are so much more incredible than I really had considered before because I'm sitting in this pool of people where this stuff is so hard because it's such an innately conservative field, accounting, for some good reason. I don't think accountants are wrong in their conservatism. There's a lot of reason they should be, but still, they could change their pricing model and they could get on Instagram, right? So the takeaway here was that really I found this silver lining in that incredibly uncomfortable environment of being an artist in an accounting program, and then being an artist, training at accounting firms. It just gave me so much insight. I had such extreme growth during those years. I was just constantly learning about, honestly, the world that I was coming out of. I think it's why I can articulate it so well, because I really had to articulate it all the time to my peers who just did not understand. So I hope that you can appreciate that. If you are a creative person, your ability to take risks, your willingness to be visible, your willingness to stand out, to be different, your willingness to try new things and to embrace new technologies. I just want you to take a moment here, right? Let's celebrate how cool that is because it is absolutely not universal. So For estimated quarterly taxes, I just want to lower the bar for you. I want to lower your perfectionist standard for yourself and say, make that first attempt. Get the information you need about quarterly taxes, get yourself educated about it. That's your job. That's the maybe the hard part. And then make your first payment, right? And I want you to just understand that no matter how off base you are in that first payment, it's still better than doing nothing. So if you're currently doing nothing, not making quarterly payments, and facing a really big, really frightening tax bill once per year, I want you to understand that quarterly taxes are your friend, even if you are terrible at them, right? Because you're basically just taking a chunk out of your future tax bill with every dollar that you pay in quarterly taxes. Okay. That's really the takeaway I want you to have. And the discomfort you have around it is so totally normal. Okay. All right. The second thing I want to talk about is investing. Now, investing is necessary to take your savings and turn them into growth, right? If you just save money in a bank account, of course, that money loses value over time because of inflation. Investing is the path to one, beat inflation, but also to grow and compound your money through the power of compound interest, which seems small in a short time horizon, but over time becomes quite large, right? This is sort of the magic of investing. In fact, this is magic that I am so into that I take 10 minutes out of every free masterclass that I offer, and there's one coming up, to go through the math of how this compound interest works. Because I think so that not enough of us have actually learned it in school or absorbed that it's real, that we aren't as motivated to, fund our IRA every year and invest the money inside of it. And if you see the math, I think I will convince some of you that you should be doing this, right? It's, I'm going to be honest, this is my secret agenda. It's to get every single creative person doing great work to grow their fuck you money, right? Grow your investments. That's why I take some time to teach about compound interest in every single one of my master classes. P.S. Yes, I have one coming up on February 14th. Yes, that's Valentine's Day. Consider it self-love to yourself. And you can sign up at go.sunlighttax.com/free if you want to sign up for that class. And yes, see that little demo on compound interest when you invest. So investing can be really terrifying, and especially the very first investment decision you make is scary. Now, when I was starting out as a tax practitioner and in my tax practice, doing people's taxes, I had already myself learned investing principles. I had studied it even before I ever went back to school for accounting. I just kind of wanted a baseline for myself of personal finance. So I had kind of studied and kind of knew what I was supposed to be doing. Now, that was actually a pretty far distance between actually doing it, right? Knowing it and doing it are two different things. But actually, the thing that really convinced me that I needed to start investing, needed to start actually taking action and taking control for myself of my investments, was working with clients. Because what I saw, and this is really important to know, before 2018, and I started my business before 2018, the fees that you paid to an investment advisor were partly tax deductible. Okay. And so people would report those fees to me. So I would see tax statements that showed what people were paying to investment advisors every year. I also saw if their portfolios were growing or not, right? Because capital gains is also a taxable thing, right? So I would get their brokerage statements and I would see how their portfolio did, and I would see what they were paying to their broker, their investment advisor, right? And what I kept seeing over and over again is that especially for women, they were paying huge fees and not necessarily getting good returns. And that started to make me really mad. Not at my clients, of course, mad at the investment people, right? Because the fact is that advisors get paid every year. They get paid whether you make money or not, most of them. And most, actively managed investments, really do not, if you just look at straight data, they really do not outperform the market more than 50% of the time. Of course, they're going to point out to you the 50% of the time that they do beat the market, but then they conveniently ignore that the other half of the time they don't. Well, what is a 50-50 outcome? That's chance. In other words, you're only beating the market if you do it more than 50% of the time, right? And nobody does, which is what convinced me that index funds, don't try to find the needle in the haystack, just buy the whole haystack. That is my investment strategy. P.S. This is not investment advice. This is my personal philosophy. I just started realizing the basic investment strategy is cheap. Like the one that you should do, the one that the data proves out is great, is cheap, because index funds, there's no active management. Like there's a very, very small, very, very small fee for index funds, but it's the lowest fee available pretty much in any kind of investment vehicle. So I was like, oh, well, I mean, it's obvious that this is how you should go, right? And yet when people are, learning how to invest can feel really overwhelming. And, I think people who are investment advisors, they feel there's ego involved. They want to try to prove that they can outperform other brokers or the market. And so they try to do it, even though the data says pretty clearly that they can't. And then, of course, they have to charge money because they're actively doing something. So I just found myself really frustrated at seeing, especially women, just pay really big fees out the door every year, whether or not they made any money. And they often didn't, right? These strategies were sold to them as something more sophisticated and better, when really the cheapest and easiest investment strategy, kind of a well-balanced portfolio of large, mid, and small cap investments, balance between stocks and bonds, and index funds is basically what you should be doing. And it's cheaper, and you don't need a manager because it's so simple, right? No manager is going to do that simplest strategy for you. So it was seeing this pattern over and over again of people overpaying and not getting results for their payment that convinced me, okay, Hannah, it is time for you to get in there and do the thing that is so clearly right, right? So that was when I actually put my first money into investments, and I stopped hunting around for the perfect advisor. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to take control of this myself. I'm going to do it myself. And I will tell you, I was absolutely like shaking when I moved my first amount of money from savings into an S&P 500 index fund. I was absolutely terrified. And did I do it exactly the way that I would advise someone to do it today? No. I moved a big chunk all at once. And now I would say you should space that out, do it a little bit over time, use some dollar cost averaging. That's a better method. But even with that very imperfect way that I did it, I'm still so glad I did it. And ultimately, as long as you remember that investing is over the long term, as long as you do not get too caught up or emotional in day-to-day swings or year-to-year swings, as long as you keep a time horizon at least 5 years out, preferably 10, preferably 20, your money goes up, right? And every structure in the US economy is built to keep the stock market going up and to put backstops in against it sliding down too far, right? Ever since the Great Depression, we've put a lot of laws in place that really help the market, prevent market tumbles from ever getting too disastrous. And I find great comfort in looking back at the data from the various stock market indices over time and seeing that, yes, even though sometimes there's a big spike and then a big drop, and those drops are really freaking scary, especially if your money is in them and you're experiencing it in your own portfolio, looking at the historic data and seeing over 100 years of the S&P 500, that thing just climbs, right? Sometimes it drops a little bit, but basically the trend overall is up. And that gives me incredible faith. And sometimes I look at those charts before I put money into index funds just to remind myself, like, this is the norm, right? Even if my portfolio does drop in a year, right? I still look back at myself 10 years ago, making my very first investment and feeling awesome that instead of paying $4,000 to an advisor, That whole 4,000 went into my actual investments, right? So I'm making a lot more money because I'm saving money because I know what I'm doing and that I've got the least amount of fees possible in the way that I'm investing. And I just feel really grateful that I did that really uncomfortable thing and move money into investments. And I say this just this morning, I went through my bank accounts and I sort of looked at which accounts had cash sitting in them. And I kind of did a little cleanup and I moved and consolidated my cash and I made a fairly large stock purchase just this morning because I want my cash working for me, right? I'm here to make that money work hard instead of my body, right? And that is what I try to teach you. So making your first investment, super scary, super uncomfortable feeling. And it is why I really gear my teaching in the investment training that I have inside Money Bootcamp. It's why I gear that training towards taking the first step. Here's the first step to take. Here's how to get started, because getting started is the very hardest part. Once you make your first investment, and it can be tiny, you learn how to do it. You learn the mechanics of it. You actually learn how to sit with the feelings of it, right? And then you can go in the next time and make another one. And all you need to do is the next time you make an investment, you aim to improve it just a little bit, right? Not perfection, just improvement. So let me see if I can do this a little bit better than last time. Okay, last time I didn't diversify at all. This time I'm going to take that diversification more into account. Okay, this time I'm going to look at the expense ratios a little harder, and I'm going to find the lower expense ratio version of this index fund, right? So just to improve a little bit each time as you make a new investment, okay? And over time, what happens when you do that? You develop confidence, you get experience, and you start to feel very comfortable with it, as I do now. So to summarize from today, I just want to remind you that you are totally normal and you're doing things totally right. I hope I have reminded you maybe of some superpowers that you have. And I just want to encourage you to reflect on your feelings of discomfort and to understand that when it comes to money, especially, discomfort is normal. And when you do a hard thing, like make your very first estimated quarterly tax payment or make your first investment decision or move money into an investment, into stocks, that discomfort will be there, right? It will be there. And you might make some mistakes, but that discomfort is a sign of growth. And it's saying, I think you need to really be careful not to interpret it in a way that says, don't ever do this again. I shouldn't do this, right? It's actually a sign of growth, and seeking out a little bit of discomfort actually moves how much comfort you have over time, right? The thing that made you super uncomfortable yesterday becomes a thing that you're comfortable with today. Okay. All right. So I encourage you, there's a couple moves you can make just for a little takeaway for today. I want to give you a next step. I really encourage you to do a little looking online at index funds. I will share a screenshot in my newsletter that goes out with this podcast of me looking at the expense ratio of an index fund that I made an investment in this morning. So I'll just circle that in this photograph so you can see it. I encourage you to just look at a couple different funds, right? I encourage you to just get a little bit more comfortable looking at stuff, right? I think if you've had an aversion to money stuff and to investing, even looking at all is a big step and might be come with some discomfort. So I encourage you to take a step today that will get you touching those feelings, even if you don't actually take any action. And then if we're talking about making your first estimated quarterly tax payment, what I would encourage you here is to pull out last year's tax return and just look at line 38. Okay. I think a lot of us are scared of even looking at our tax return. And believe me, I totally get that. But line 38 is the line that shows you what your penalties are for an underpayment of estimated quarterly taxes. Okay. So go just look at line 38 and just see what's on it. If it's blank, you didn't pay any penalties last year, which either means that you paid enough in quarterly taxes or that you didn't make enough money to owe quarterly taxes, which may also be true. Okay. But of course, if you see a number on there, that's basically the expense of inaction. Okay. And hopefully that can be a little motivating towards, okay, I'm going to figure out estimated quarterly taxes. I'm going to get on top of that this year in 2024. Okay. And if you want some help with either one of those two things, if you want a little layout of how estimated quarterly taxes work, or you want to see my little 10-minute exploration of compound interest and investing, I am holding a free masterclass on Valentine's Day, February 14th, called Make Your Taxes Easier and Stash an Extra $130K in Your Savings. You can sign up at go.sunlighttax.com/free. And it's a 1-hour class. It's free. I will be teaching you some basic concepts about, yes, estimated quarterly taxes, yes, investing. I'll also be talking to you about my program where I do deeper hand-holding on making these moves with your money so that you can grow ultimately. So whether or not you decide to come to that class, I hope that today's episode has given you a little more faith in yourself and help you get a little more comfortable with the discomfort that is a normal and healthy sign of you growing. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.